Why did May 17th matter? To most people, it wouldn't. It wasn't Rachel's birthday, our wedding anniversary, or any other big milestone. But what unfolded next, the events and revelations that followed, would leave you absolutely stunned. Sometimes, the most ordinary days hold the most extraordinary surprises. My name's Matt. I've been married to Rachel for 12 years, and while we've had an amazing life together, I'd be lying if I said things still felt as exciting as they did back in the early days. Life has a way of falling into routines, doesn't it? Work, kids, errands. It's not a bad thing, but it can make you forget to stop and appreciate the little things. Rachel is everything to me, her and our 2 kids. But lately, I couldn't help but notice she didn't light up the way she used to when I did something sweet or romantic. It wasn't that she didn't care. I think life had just worn us both down, and that's when I decided enough was enough. I needed to remind her, and maybe even myself, of all the reasons we fell in love in the first place. Being the kind of guy who's hopelessly in love, and maybe a little cheesy, I wanted to create a night for Rachel she'd never forget. And for that, I needed help. On Monday at work, I turned to the 3 most flirtatious single women in my office. Jessica, Amanda, women who always seemed to know a thing or two about romance. "All right, ladies," I said, leaning against the edge of my desk with a grin. "If you could design the most romantic evening imaginable, what would it look like?" They didn't hesitate for a second. Jessica suggested a trip to Paris, complete with dinner under the Eiffel Tower. Amanda said something about a private gondola ride through Venice, and Sophie swooned over the idea of a hot tub overlooking the Swiss Alps. I laughed, holding up my hands. "Okay, slow down, you 3. Let's be realistic here. I'm not trying to blow our life savings or hop on a plane tonight. I need something romantic but doable, like something I can pull off at home or maybe at a nice spot downtown." By lunchtime, they had regrouped and handed me a list of ideas that actually fit my budget. Candles, music, rose petals, a handwritten card, and, of course, dinner at Rachel's favorite restaurant. They were giddy with excitement, teasing me about how the night would go and betting on whether I'd mess it up. I didn't mind the teasing. It just made me more determined to nail this plan. I treated them to lunch as a thank you and got to work. The first thing I did was take the afternoon off on Wednesday to give myself plenty of time to set everything up. Normally, I didn't get home until 6 p.m., but Rachel was always back by 3:30 to meet the kids when they got off the school bus. That gave me just enough time to pull everything together before she even realized something was up. Tuesday night, I casually told Rachel, "Hey, my parents are planning to take the kids out tomorrow evening, dinner, and maybe a movie. They probably won't be back until 8 or so." Her face lit up like I hadn't seen in a while. She loved her parents, and a little time for just the 2 of us. She seemed genuinely excited. The kids were even more thrilled when I let them in on the plan, especially after I mentioned they'd be staying the night at their grandparents' house. They practically jumped out of their chairs at the thought of being spoiled rotten by Grandma and Grandpa. When Wednesday rolled around, I left work at 11:30 a.m., armed with a list and a mission. First stop was the store, where I grabbed a heartfelt card, her favorite wine, and a box of chocolates I knew she couldn't resist. Next up, the florist. I walked in and confidently asked for 2 pounds of pink rose petals. The florist raised an eyebrow, clearly wondering if I'd lost my mind. I explained my plan, and she smiled as she packed the petals. "You must really love your wife to go through all this trouble," she said as I walked out, petals in hand. By then, I was feeling pretty good about myself. The last thing I needed to check off was dinner. I called Rachel's favorite steakhouse and booked us a table for 8 p.m. Everything was falling into place, and I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized what I'd planned. Little did I know, though, the night would take a turn I could never have predicted. I figured a romantic night wouldn't be complete without good food. Just in case we ditched the dinner reservation, I had a backup plan. 2 steaks chilling in the fridge, ready to be thrown on the grill. When I got back home, I made sure to park the car behind the house where it couldn't be seen. I quietly brought all the supplies inside and got to work. The clock read 2:30 p.m., 1 hour. That's all I had to turn the house into something special. I wasted no time. I put the wine in the freezer to cool faster, spread pink rose petals across the bed in the shape of a heart, and used chocolate chips to write, "I love you" in the middle. I wanted every detail to be just right. In the bathroom, I filled the tub with steaming hot water, added a generous amount of bubble bath, and scattered the leftover petals across the surface. On her nightstand, I left a thoughtful card next to her favorite book, while the wine waited for us in an ice bucket by the bed. I dimmed the lights to a soft glow, poured 2 glasses of wine, and placed them neatly on the bedside table. To top it all off, I put our little portable CD player on the dresser, ready to set the mood with romantic music as soon as she stepped in. Satisfied, I jumped into the shower, quickly shaved, and got ready. Everything was falling into place. At 3:25 p.m., sharp, I heard her car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced with anticipation. This was going to be the moment she'd remember forever. But instead of hearing the sound of her walking through the front door, I caught something else. A sound that didn't belong. Laughter. Not her warm, familiar laugh, but something sharper, and footsteps, more than one pair. I froze. What was going on? Before I could make sense of it, the bedroom door flew open, and there she was, Rachel. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, looking just as startled as she did, was her boss, Michael. 5 seconds. That's all it took to tear my world apart. Rachel stood frozen in place, her blouse hanging open and her bra already gone. Her wide eyes darted from me to the room and back again. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, but I could see her brain catching up to the situation. Rose petals, wine, dim lights, and her husband standing there, holding 2 glasses. Finally, she managed to gasp, "Oh my God!" Michael, unlike Rachel, didn't waste any time. He turned and bolted, practically stumbling over himself as he fled the house. It didn't take him more than a minute to be completely gone. Rachel dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. "Matt, please, I'm so sorry. I love you. Let me explain." I didn't say a word. Instead, I walked over to the bed, calmly tipped both glasses of wine over the perfect heart of rose petals, and grabbed my clothes from the closet. I got dressed in complete silence, while she begged me to listen, tears soaking the carpet at her knees. Once I was ready, I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You better not be here when I get back." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit in the ruins of everything she had just destroyed. I walked out of the house without a word, got into my car, and drove aimlessly until I found myself at Murphy's Bar. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet and anonymous, just what I needed. By the time I finished my 4th beer, I was staring at the table trying to figure out what the hell to do next. At 6:30, I pulled back into the driveway. The house was eerily silent. Rachel's car was gone, and the front door was left slightly ajar. I stepped inside, the stillness almost suffocating. A quick glance around downstairs told me nothing had changed, but when I went upstairs to the bedroom, it was clear she'd been here. Everything I'd set up was still in place. The bubble bath was still warm, the wine unopened, and the chocolates untouched. But her closet door hung wide open, and several drawers had been yanked out in a hurry. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ruined petals and the spilled wine soaking into the sheets. My mind felt like static, unable to process anything clearly. Somewhere in the distance, my phone buzzed. I didn't even check who was calling. I just switched it off. As I sat there in the dim light of the room, one thought crossed my mind. I'm going to have to replace the mattress in the guest room. The next morning, I woke up early, ran through the motions, shower, shave, dress, and headed to work. But I felt completely detached, like I was watching myself move through the day from the outside. The moment I walked into the office, the girls were on me. "Well, how did it go?" They practically squealed, all 3 of them grinning from ear to ear. Jessica smirked and nudged Amanda. "You look like it was some night." "Oh, it was a night, all right," I said flatly. Their giggles stopped immediately as I gave them the short, brutal version of what had happened. They stood in stunned silence until Cheryl finally asked, What are you going to do now? I shrugged. Survive, I muttered, and make sure my kids are okay. I gave them a pointed look. And I'd appreciate it if you all kept this between us. I don't need to be the office punchline. They apologized over and over, offering their support and promising they wouldn't say a word. After they left, I shut my door and stared at my desk. By 9:30 a.m., I'd already started making changes. I froze every joint bank account, canceled all credit cards, adjusted my life insurance policy, and transferred my 401k to a separate account. I wasn't about to leave her with an open road to ruin me financially. Then I called my parents. Rachel and I are having issues, I told them, carefully keeping my voice calm. Would you mind taking the kids for a few days, maybe through the weekend? They were heartbroken to hear the news, but they agreed without hesitation. When I finally turned my phone back on, I saw 20 missed calls and a flood of messages from Rachel. I didn't read a single one. I deleted them all without a second thought. Later that afternoon, I called an old friend who connected me with a divorce lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy who came highly recommended. I scheduled an appointment for Friday morning. It wasn't until I was sitting across from the lawyer's desk, listening to him outline my options, that I realized just how complicated my life was about to become. It's your word against hers, he said, blunt as a hammer. You didn't actually catch her in the act, and legally, she has as much claim to the house as you do. I felt my blood boil as he kept going. Here's the tough part. Most likely she'll get custody of the kids, the house, and about 40% of your income after taxes. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my composure. Look, the lawyer said, leaning forward, I hate to say it, but you might want to think about counseling, or at least a cooling-off period. A divorce is going to drain you in ways you can't imagine. I barely heard the rest of his advice. All I could think about was how easily everything I'd worked for could slip away. No matter what you do, you're going to be paying child support for the next 8 years, the lawyer said, his tone as blunt as a sledgehammer. On top of that, you'll be covering the house payments. The best advice I can give you is to keep the peace, at least for the kids. Move into the spare bedroom, stay civil, and try to minimize the damage. I left his office feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. The idea of staying under the same roof as Rachel made my stomach churn, but I knew he was right. Later that evening, I moved all my belongings into the guest bedroom. I bought a new mattress, threw the old one onto the curb, and tried not to think about what had happened on it. I kept ignoring Rachel's calls, but I knew she wouldn't stay away forever. Eventually, she'd come home, and I tried to brace myself for the confrontation that was sure to follow. On Friday, I picked up the kids on my way home from work and took them out for pizza. They were bubbling with excitement, telling me all about the fun they'd had with their grandparents. Hearing them laugh and joke helped me feel normal for a little while. For a moment, I almost forgot about the mess Rachel had left behind, but the reprieve didn't last long. Around 8:30 p.m., Rachel showed up. The kids ran to her, wrapping her in hugs and telling her everything about their week. She smiled and nodded at them, but her eyes stayed locked on me the entire time, cold and sharp. By 10 o'clock p.m., the kids had gone to bed, and I retreated to the guest room. Just as I was about to close the door, Rachel stopped me. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Not tonight," I said, my voice flat and unfeeling. "Maybe tomorrow." I shut the door and locked it. As I turned away, I heard her let out a muffled scream of frustration before stomping off. I pictured her walking into what used to be our bedroom, seeing the stripped bed and the mess she'd left behind. I heard faint rustling as she tried to tidy the room, but I didn't care. I wasn't her problem solver anymore. The next morning, I noticed the card, rose petals, chocolates, and the empty wine bottle all stuffed into the trash. Seeing it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It just felt empty. The kids went about their usual Saturday routine, hanging out with friends and playing football. I wasn't hungry, so I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. As I was finishing my first cup, Rachel appeared. She looked terrible, her eyes red and puffy, her face pale. "You know you're going to have to talk to me eventually," she said, her voice shaky but insistent. I stood, poured another cup of coffee, grabbed the newspaper, and walked onto the deck without answering her. "Matt, you can't avoid me forever," she said, following me outside. I turned to face her, my voice sharp. "Why, Rachel? What can you possibly say to justify what I saw on Wednesday? How long has it been going on with Michael?" Her face crumpled as she stammered, "It was only the second time, I swear, Matt." I let out a bitter laugh. "Do you think I'm stupid? And while we're at it, don't call me Matt or honey or anything. You've lost the right to use words that sound even remotely affectionate." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. "We're going to coexist for the kids, nothing more. Until I figure out what's best for them and for me, that's all this is." Rachel's demeanor shifted. "So that's it? You've already made your decision?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "Yeah, Rachel, it looks like I have," I shot back. She stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. I stayed outside, my hands trembling as I sipped my coffee. Rage burned in my chest as I ripped the newspaper in half, trying to find an outlet for my frustration. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Work was a nightmare, but at least it distracted me from the hell waiting for me at home. Unfortunately, someone at the office had let the story slip. Now, every time I walked through the halls, the women would give me these pitying looks, like I was some wounded animal. I gritted my teeth and kept moving forward. I had to. My boss pulled me aside one morning, concern etched across his face. "Do you need to take some personal time, Matt?" he asked gently. I shook my head, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm managing," I replied. "Honestly, staying busy is the only thing keeping me together right now." The truth was, my kids had already figured out that something was wrong. They weren't oblivious, and it broke my heart when my youngest asked me one night, "Dad, did we do something bad?" "No, buddy," I said quickly, wrapping him in a hug. "You and your sister haven't done anything wrong. Your mom and I are just going through a tough time, but it'll all work out, I promise." I hated lying to them. They deserved the truth, but how could I explain what had happened without tearing their little world apart? Meanwhile, Rachel was relentless. She tried to talk to me every chance she got, apologizing, pleading, even trying to seduce me once, but I felt absolutely nothing. Whatever love I'd once had for her was buried under a heavy mix of anger, pain, and emptiness. It was in this miserable state of mind that Cheryl barged into my office one Thursday afternoon. "Grab your coat. We're leaving," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I looked up, startled. What?" "Maybe you didn't hear me," she snapped, crossing her arms. "This isn't a request, Matt. Grab your coat, now." Before I knew what was happening, Cheryl had dragged me to Murphy's bar. Waiting at a corner table were Katie and Amanda, the other 2 members of her trio. As soon as we sat down and ordered drinks, Cheryl wasted no time, cutting straight to the point. "You need to snap out of it, Matt," she said firmly, fixing me with a glare. "For 2 weeks, you've been walking around like a zombie, and while we all want to support you, you're going to drown if you keep going like this." Her words hit a nerve, and my frustration bubbled to the surface. "I have my reasons," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "So why don't you back off?" Karen leaned forward, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Back off? Are you kidding me? We're not Rachel, Matt. We're your friends. What the hell do you want? Are you just going to sit around feeling sorry for yourself forever?" I dropped my gaze to my glass. "I just want things to go back to how they were," I muttered. "Before all of this happened." Katie leaned in, her tone soft but piercing. "Didn't you say your marriage felt stale? That you wanted to bring the spark back? Do you really want to go back to that life? Or do you still love her?" My fist hit the table before I could stop myself. "I love her and hate her at the same time," I shouted, my voice shaking. "I want to strangle her and Rick for what they did to me. I don't know what to do or how to start fixing any of this." Cheryl raised her hand to flag the waiter. "Let's eat first," she said calmly. "Then we'll figure it out." By the time the evening was over, I felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts. They were right. I had to act. Letting this drag on was tearing me apart. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me in the living room. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice sharp as I walked through the door. "So what?" I shot back, my voice cold and harsh. Why do you even care?" Her face crumpled, and without another word, she retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence settle over the house. The same emptiness I'd been feeling for weeks began to creep back in. The next day, I sat across from my lawyer, Randy, who leaned back in his chair with a skeptical look. "I thought you were holding off on filing for divorce," he said, raising an eyebrow. "I am," I replied. "But I want to go after Rick and the company he and Rachel work for. First, the company, and then I want to hit Rick with an alienation of affection lawsuit." Randy sighed and folded his arms. "Matt, you don't have any solid evidence. I already told you that." "I know," I said. "But their company's public, and with all the scandals in the news lately, I doubt they'd want any bad press. Plus, I'm sure there's a morality clause in their bylaws, a married boss screwing a married subordinate, and on company time, that can't be good for their image." Randy considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right. It'll take a couple of days to draft everything and file the papers. I'll keep you updated." For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Over the next few days, I joked around at work, spent quality time with my kids, and even exchanged a few words with Rachel, which made things a little easier for the kids. But deep down, I was just waiting. The fight was coming. By Thursday, Randy called to tell me the company had been served. I told him to hold off on serving Rick until we'd reached a deal with the company. Less than a week later, Randy and I were sitting across from their CEO and one of the managers in a conference room. "We've reviewed the documents," the manager began, "but it seems you failed to provide any concrete evidence to support your claims." He kept talking, dismissing my case as frivolous, but I didn't bother responding. Instead, I stood up and headed for the door. "I guess I'll see you in court," I said casually. "And just so we're clear, we'll be deposing every employee in that office. How many of them do you think knew what was going on? I only need one or two to spill the truth. And how many managers are going to defend Rick when their own necks are on the line?" I smiled as I leaned forward. "Good luck, gentlemen." With that, I walked out, leaving them to stew in their thoughts. By Wednesday, Randy called again. "They're ready to make this mess go away," he said. "Here's what I want," I replied. $250,000, attorney fees covered, and both of them transferred to different state offices. That's the deal. Let them know they have until noon tomorrow. Later that afternoon, Randy called back. "They're offering $150,000, plus fees and the transfers." "Randy," I said flatly, "stop playing nice. Tell them the price is now $300,000, and if they counter again, it goes up to $400,000. Maybe they'll learn something from this." By 3:30 p.m. Thursday, Randy called again. "They've accepted your terms," he said. At 4:30, the paperwork and the check landed on my desk. I signed everything, handed it back, and stood up. "If anyone needs me, let them know I'm out for the rest of the day," I told my secretary as I grabbed my coat. On my way home, I called Randy. "Serve Rick tonight," I said. "Do it at his house." For the first time in weeks, I felt euphoric. Tomorrow, Rick would finally feel the weight of what he'd done. When I got home, I called out, "All right, that's it. Grab your coats. We're going out for dinner." Rachel blinked at me, stunned. "Come on, Rachel," I added, motioning to her. A wide smile spread across her face, and she hurried to grab her coat. At dinner, we laughed and talked like we had in the early years of our marriage. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. When we got home, the kids thanked me for the evening and headed to bed. Rachel came over, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered, "Thank you. Tonight meant a lot to me." I nodded and replied, "We'll have a nice long talk tomorrow. Get some sleep." The next morning, I was sitting in the kitchen, enjoying a quiet cup of coffee, when Rachel stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "You son of a bitch!" she shouted. "You knew what was going to happen today, didn't you?" "Not exactly," I said calmly, taking another sip, "but pretty close. Where's the job they offered you?" "Tenley, New Jersey, or whatever hole that is," she spat. "Apparently my services aren't needed here anymore. It was New Jersey or nothing. I told them I wasn't moving, so they handed me severance and gave me 20 minutes to clean out my desk. 8 years at that company, and I was out the door in 20 minutes. She slumped into a chair, tears spilling down her face. "And Rick?" I asked, my voice steady. "They're shipping him off to Flint, Michigan," she muttered bitterly. I couldn't help but grin. "The armpit of the Midwest," I said, my smile growing wider. "Serves him right," I said with a smirk, pulling out a chair and sitting across from Rachel. She was sitting there, her head low, tears silently streaming down her cheeks, but I wasn't about to soften up. "All right, Rachel," I began, my tone cold and deliberate. "If you want any chance of staying in this family, here's how it's going to go." She lifted her head, her red, swollen eyes meeting mine. "First, you're getting tested for every STD under the sun, and I want a signed certificate confirming you're clean. Second, you're taking a polygraph test." Her mouth opened slightly in shock, but I ignored it. I pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the table toward her. "Here are the questions. You'll see they start off simple, but they don't stay that way." Her hands trembled as she picked it up and started reading. As her eyes scanned each line, I could see her face falling further and further. By the time she got to the end, she was sobbing uncontrollably. "Am I the father of our children? Why did you cheat on me? When we were together in the last few months, were you thinking about me or Rick? How often have you lied to me? Do you still love me? You have an appointment tomorrow morning at 9, I told her flatly. If you pass, and there are no surprises, we'll have a session with a marriage counselor on Saturday at 10. Rachel clutched the paper to her chest, tears soaking into the edges. "I can answer them now," she choked out between sobs. "I'll wait," I said, my tone ice cold. "I don't trust you anymore, Rachel. If there's any chance at fixing this, we start from zero. No more lies." The next day she went through with it. Some of her answers left a bad taste in my mouth, but for the most part, she passed. Did it rebuild my trust? Not even close. Am I staying? That's still up in the air. The hardest part of all of this? I miss real intimacy. We haven't made love in months. Just mechanical, emotionless acts to release tension. It's not the same. The connection we once had? Gone. As for Rick, he took his transfer to Flint, Michigan a year ago. I couldn't resist sending him a Christmas card from sunny Florida that read, "Glad you're not here." Oh, and karma caught up with him. His wife and kids left him 6 months after he moved. Guess the Midwest didn't suit them. A couple of weeks later, the doorbell rang while I was watching TV. I groaned, got up, and shuffled to the door. Peeking through the peephole, I felt my stomach churn. How the hell did she find me? For a moment, I thought about just ignoring it and sitting back down. But I knew Rachel. She wouldn't leave until she said what she came to say. Sighing, I cracked the door open, keeping the chain latched. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat and unwelcoming. "I just want to talk," she said softly, her eyes pleading with me. "I made it clear when I left," I said, my voice hard. "I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear from you." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know why you left. I came home and you were just gone. Your stuff, everything, gone." "Don't play dumb, Rachel," I snapped. "You knew exactly what would happen when you walked out that door with Rick." "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, my hand on the door. Part of me wanted to slam it shut, but the other part, the one that needed closure, knew I had to deal with this. Letting out a frustrated sigh, I unhooked the chain and stepped aside. She walked into the living room, sitting stiffly on the couch. "Can I have some water?" she asked quietly. As I made my way to the kitchen, my mind drifted back to the night when everything began to fall apart. It was a regular weekday evening, nothing special. I came home from work, tired but ready to relax, and found Rachel in the bedroom. But she wasn't in her usual casual clothes. She was wearing that dress. The little black one she always used when she wanted to make a statement. "I didn't know we had plans tonight," I said, raising an eyebrow. "We don't," she replied casually, fixing her earrings in the mirror. "I have a date." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "A date? With who?" "Someone from work," she said, not even looking at me. "He's new and didn't want to go to Sylvia's birthday party alone, so he asked me to go with him." I stared at her, barely able to process what I was hearing. "Does he know you're married?" "Of course," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "It's not like anything's going to happen. Besides, I don't want to go alone, and you won't go with me." "You know why I don't go, Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't stand Sylvia or her parties, and honestly, I don't think you should be around her either." Her expression turned cold. "Get over it, Sam. Sylvia's been my best friend since first grade. I'm not going to cut her off just because you don't like her." "This isn't about not liking her," I snapped. "She's been divorced 4 times, and every time it was because she cheated. Her parties are full of drugs and sleaze. That's not the kind of crowd you should be around, and you know it." "Oh, so just because she cheated, you think I'm going to?" Rachel shot back, her voice rising. "I think it's a hell of a lot more likely," I said bitterly, the words tasting like poison as they left my mouth. I never planned to get married again. For 2 years, my life was quiet, simple, and good. I dated casually, nothing serious, and even had a friend with benefits. Things were steady, peaceful, until one day she showed up. "You heard me when I told you what would happen if you went on that date," I said, my voice cold and controlled. "You ignored me, went anyway, and I did exactly what I said I'd do. So tell me, Rachel, how did you even find me?" "A very expensive private investigator," she admitted, her tone subdued. "And why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why go to so much trouble? What is it you want?" "You're my husband," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "And how exactly did you afford this very expensive investigator on your secretary's salary?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I sold the house," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "What house, Bapta?" I asked before the realization hit me. "Ah, the one the court gave you." I leaned back in my chair and shook my head. "Never mind, it doesn't matter. The point is, you wasted your time and money. We're done. I meant it when I said goodbye. You did exactly what I knew you'd do when you walked out that door, and there's no point trying to convince me otherwise. Your best friend called me at 1 in the morning, Rachel. She let me hear every disgusting detail for myself." Her face crumpled as tears began to fall. "She set me up," Rachel cried desperately. "I need to tell you what really happened that night. Please, just let me explain." "Fine," I said, crossing my arms. "Go ahead. Let's hear your story." Rachel took a shaky breath and began, her voice trembling. "I didn't go to that party to sleep with anyone. That wasn't even on my mind. Yes, I dressed up because Sylvia asked me to. She said she didn't like Todd and wanted me to distract him. She told me to dress sexy so he'd think he was lucky. But it was just to keep him occupied. That's all it was." Her voice faltered, and she looked down at her hands. "Todd stuck to me like glue the entire night, but nothing happened. I danced with other people. I wasn't doing anything wrong." I stayed silent, my expression unreadable, and she continued. "After the party, I started feeling strange. My head was spinning. Sylvia told me I'd had too much to drink and needed to lie down, so she put me in one of the guest rooms. That's when everything gets blurry." I leaned back in my chair, skeptical but letting her continue. "I don't know how or when it started," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "But at some point, I realized they were having sex with me." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I kept my face blank. "I thought I was at home, Sam," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was in bed with you. But then I heard someone say, 'Hurry up, I'm next.' And that's when it hit me. I wasn't home." Her voice cracked as she described what happened next. "I looked around and saw Sylvia lying on the bed next to me, and there were men standing around. Todd, Ben Grady, and others, all of them naked. One of them was waiting his turn. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to walk out, but I stayed and let her finish. "You know how I am when we're together," she said, her face full of shame. "I get lost in it. I don't know how many of them did that to me before I passed out." She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "The next morning, I woke up next to Bob Flanagan. He was leaning on his elbow, staring at me with this smug look on his face. I asked him, 'What?' And you know what he said? 'I never thought you'd cheat on Sam, but I'm glad you did. Hope to see you again.'" Rachel's hands shook as she continued. "I slapped him, got dressed, and left. I went straight to the hospital. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to keep listening. They tested me and found Rohypnol and ecstasy in my system," she said. "The hospital called the police, and while I waited for them to arrive, I tried calling you over and over again, but you didn't answer. When I got home and saw that everything was gone, I realized why. You'd already left." Her voice cracked as she wiped more tears from her cheeks. "When the police arrived, I told them everything I could remember. They started with Flanagan. He said he thought I knew what was happening. He claimed I'd always known what went on at Sylvia's parties and that I had stood by, watched, and even laughed about it before. My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. The police pressed him harder, and when they questioned Todd, he finally confessed, she said, her knuckles white as she gripped her hands together. I never planned to get married again. For 2 years, my life was quiet, simple, and good. I dated casually, nothing serious, and even had a friend with benefits. Things were steady, peaceful, until one day she showed up. You heard me when I told you what would happen if you went on that date, I said, my voice cold and controlled. You ignored me, went anyway, and I did exactly what I said I'd do. So tell me, Rachel, how did you even find me? A very expensive private investigator, she admitted, her tone subdued. And why? I asked, genuinely curious. Why go to so much trouble? What is it you want? You're my husband, she said simply, as if that explained everything. And how exactly did you afford this very expensive investigator on your secretary's salary? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I sold the house, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. What house? I asked before the realization hit me. The one the court gave you. I leaned back in my chair and shook my head. Never mind, it doesn't matter. The point is, you wasted your time and money. We're done. I meant it when I said goodbye. You did exactly what I knew you'd do when you walked out that door, and there's no point trying to convince me otherwise. Your best friend called me at 1 a.m, Rachel. She let me hear every disgusting detail for myself. Her face crumpled as tears began to fall. She set me up, Rachel cried desperately. I need to tell you what really happened that night. Please, just let me explain. Fine, I said, crossing my arms. Go ahead. Let's hear your story. Rachel took a shaky breath and began, her voice trembling. I didn't go to that party to sleep with anyone. That wasn't even on my mind. Yes, I dressed up because Sylvia asked me to. She said she didn't like Todd and wanted me to distract him. She told me to dress sexy so he'd think he was lucky, but it was just to keep him occupied. That's all it was. Her voice faltered and she looked down at her hands. Todd stuck to me like glue the entire night, but nothing happened. I danced with other people. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I stayed silent, my expression unreadable, and she continued. After the party, I started feeling strange. My head was spinning. Sylvia told me I'd had too much to drink and needed to lie down, so she put me in one of the guest rooms. That's when everything gets blurry. I leaned back in my chair, skeptical, but letting her continue. I don't know how or when it started, Rachel said, her voice breaking, but at some point I realized they were having sex with me. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I kept my face blank. I thought I was at home, Sam, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was in bed with you. But then I heard someone say, hurry up, I'm next. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't home. Her voice cracked as she described what happened next. I looked around and saw Sylvia lying on the bed next to me, and there were men standing around. Todd, Ben Grady, and others, all of them naked. One of them was waiting his turn. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to walk out, but I stayed and let her finish. You know how I am when we're together, she said, her face full of shame. I get lost in it. I don't know how many of them did that to me before I passed out. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. The next morning, I woke up next to Bob Flanagan. He was leaning on his elbow, staring at me with this smug look on his face. I asked him, what? And you know what he said? I never thought you'd cheat on Sam, but I'm glad you did. Hope to see you again. Rachel's hands shook as she continued. I slapped him, got dressed, and left. I went straight to the hospital. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to keep listening. They tested me and found Rohypnol and ecstasy in my system, she said. The hospital called the police, and while I waited for them to arrive, I tried calling you over and over again. But you didn't answer. When I got home and saw that everything was gone, I realized why. You'd already left. Her voice cracked as she wiped more tears from her cheeks. When the police arrived, I told them everything I could remember. They started with Flanagan. He said he thought I knew what was happening. He claimed I'd always known what went on at Sylvia's parties, and that I had stood by, watched, and even laughed about it before. My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. The police pressed him harder, and when they questioned Todd, he finally confessed, she said, her knuckles white, as she gripped her hands together. It was all Sylvia's doing, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. She told Todd I'd been hesitant about joining in, but assured him that if she helped me along, I'd come around. She said once the drugs wore off, I'd enjoy it, and that I'd want to do it again. She paused, swallowing hard. And the thing is, she hesitated, her voice shaking. She was right. I did enjoy it. Her words hit me like nails, hammering shut the coffin of any reconciliation I might have considered. But she wasn't done. She messed up, though, Rachel continued. She didn't care that I told her over and over that I wouldn't do it without you. You had to be on board, Sam. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. It was as if she couldn't hear herself, couldn't understand how everything she said only pushed me further away. She wiped her tears and continued. After the hospital, after the police questioning, one of the officers drove me home. That's when I realized why I couldn't get through to you. You were gone. Everything was gone. I broke down and cried for 2 straight days. She sniffled, trying to steady her voice. After that, I hired a lawyer and filed lawsuits against everyone who was at that party. Everyone who took advantage of me. I raised an eyebrow. And? I asked skeptically. Most of the lawsuits were thrown out, she admitted, her tone heavy. Everyone claimed the same thing, that they thought I knew what I was doing. But the suits against Sylvia and Todd stuck because they conspired against me. I won those claims. Her voice wavered as she explained further. Sylvia didn't have anything to give except her house. They asked if I'd accept it as part of the settlement. It was still mortgaged for $30,000, but with the money I got from Todd, I was able to pay it off. She paused, looking me straight in the eye. I sold the house immediately and used the money to hire a private investigator to find you. And here I am. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. And you spent all that money and time tracking me down for what? To try to fix this? Yes, she sobbed. I love you, Sam. I belong to you. I let out a bitter laugh. You would have been smarter to spend that money on a lawyer and file for divorce. You could have used abandonment as your reason. I don't want a divorce, Sam, she said, desperation thick in her voice. I want us. What you want doesn't matter to me anymore, Rachel, I said coldly. You may not have done it willingly, but you walked out that door of your own free will. I told you what would happen if you left, and you did it anyway. That's the issue here, not what happened at Sylvia's. You made your choice that night. She broke down again, crying harder. Sam, can't you understand? I didn't do this willingly. I was drugged. No, Rachel, I said sharply, my voice rising. You're the one who doesn't understand. This isn't just about that party. It's about the moment you walked out that door to see Sylvia, dressed for another man. That moment showed me exactly how much you respected me, how much you respected our marriage. You killed us the second you left. Rachel shook her head, her voice trembling. It's not like that, Sam. It wouldn't have hurt us. Stop, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't even finish that sentence. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to be with someone who walked out on me like that, Rachel. You showed me exactly who you are, and I can't unsee it. I didn't, she began, but I held up a hand. Just leave, I said firmly. There's nothing left to say. I need to get ready for dinner. She hesitated for a moment, then tried again. I'll stay and eat with you. We can talk more, and I can convince you that we can fix this. Before she could finish her plea, the front door opened. Baby, I'm home, called out a cheerful voice. A stunning blonde walked in, smiling brightly. What's for dinner? Her eyes landed on Rachel, and for a brief moment her smile faltered, but she quickly composed herself. Who's this? She asked, her tone curious but calm. This is Rachel, I replied coolly. You've heard me mention her once or twice. Rachel, meet Beverly. To my surprise, Beverly walked up to Rachel and hugged her warmly. Thank you for sending Sam to me, she said brightly, her tone completely sincere. Then she turned back to me, beaming. What's for dinner, babe? I was thinking we'd go out tonight, I replied, standing up. I made a reservation at Angelo's. Perfect, Beverly said with a grin. I'll go get changed. As she headed toward the bedroom, she glanced back at Rachel. Nice to meet you, Rachel. Maybe we can get together sometime and compare experiences. Rachel stood frozen, her face pale, as Beverly disappeared down the hall. You need to leave, Rachel, I said, breaking the silence. I have to get ready for dinner? Rachel's voice trembled as she asked, Does she know you were married? She knows, I replied simply. Tears welled up in her eyes again. You need to tell her that I'll fight for you, Sam, she said desperately. I shook my head, letting out a sigh. Wake up, Rachel. To fight for me, you'd have to spend time with me, and that's not going to happen. I walked to the door, holding it open. Get a divorce. Find someone else. And when you do, don't drag the same baggage into that relationship that you dumped on me. Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she cried out, Damn it, Sam! Why can't you understand? I didn't cheat on you. I was drugged. It wasn't my choice. It wasn't my fault. I sighed deeply, feeling exhausted from repeating myself. Rachel, for you to have been drugged, you had to be there. That's the whole issue. I told you not to go. I warned you that if you walked out that door, it would mean the end of our marriage. You ignored me. You left. The marriage is over. It really is that simple. She stared at me, her face contorted with desperation. I'm not going to divorce you, Sam, she said, her voice breaking. And you need to tell your girlfriend about this. About us. She can never marry you. You're mine. A faint smirk crossed my face. She can't marry me anyway, I replied casually. She's already married, same as me. Her husband won't give her a divorce, and she doesn't see the point in spending money to get one. Rachel's expression fell as the weight of my words sank in. Her lips trembled as she whispered, I'll go, but I won't go far. I can't bring you back if I'm too far away. So I'm moving here. I'm going to win you back. I let out a bitter laugh. That's nonsense, Rachel. I've told you before, and I'll tell you again. I don't want you. I'll never want you. You need to accept that. Her tears fell harder as she turned and walked out the door. The moment it shut behind her, I felt a wave of relief. Beverly stepped into the room a few minutes later, absolutely stunning in a sleek black dress that fit her like a glove. She tilted her head, giving me a playful look. Why aren't you ready yet? She teased, raising an eyebrow. I'm getting there, I said with a small grin. It just took longer to deal with her than I expected. Is she gone? Beverly asked, her tone more serious this time. Forever it seems, I replied, my voice calm. I made it clear to her that I wanted nothing to do with her. Beverly's lips curled into a sly smile as she stepped closer. Good, she said softly, because I'm not letting you get away from me. I couldn't help but smile back at her. Give me 10 minutes and I'll be ready, I said. This is the end of the story, so don't forget to share your opinion and experience in the comments, and also, if you like the story, subscribe to the channel that would not miss new video.